my hands inside a busted grandfather clock when the woman in the gray blazer walked through the front door of my shop like she already owned the place. That was not unusual. People who came to Hartley Fine Clocks on Magazine Street in New Orleans usually walked in like they owned the place, because most of them owned something around here. Old houses on Prytania, Garden District lots that had been in the same family since the 1880s. Art they did not understand but refused to sell. I was used to it. What I was not used to was someone walking straight past the display cases, past the long case clock I had just finished refinishing, past the French mantelpiece I was selling on consignment for a widow on Esplanade, and stopping directly in front of the work table where I was sitting in a dirty apron with clock oil on my forearms. "You're Miles Beckett," she said. "Last time I checked," I said. "You need something repaired, or are you just confirming names?" She put her bag on the corner of my table without asking. It was the kind of bag that cost more than my rent. "My name is Isabelle Voss." I knew that name. Anybody in New Orleans preservation circles knew Voss. Hotels on Magazine Street, event spaces in the Warehouse District, 2 historic inns in the French Quarter, a ballroom venue on St. Charles that people booked 2 years in advance. Voss Properties had been restoring and operating landmark buildings in the city for 3 generations. The kind of company that had a plaque in the lobby of City Hall and a scholarship fund at Tulane. I set down my tool and looked at her properly. She was maybe early 40s, dark hair pulled back, a kind of composed stillness that looked practiced but not fake. The blazer was expensive. The shoes were expensive. The expression was not. Her expression looked like someone who had not slept well in a week and was trying not to let anyone know. "All right," I said. "What can I do for Voss Properties?" "I need a fiancé by Friday." The shop went quiet except for the ticking. I had maybe 15 clocks running at any given moment in that room, and for a second I was aware of all of them. "Lady," I said, "I fix clocks." "I know what you do." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. 3 years ago, you refused to sell this building to a development group called Meridian Holdings. They offered you significantly above market value." I stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because Meridian Holdings is a subsidiary of my cousin Victor's investment company, and I needed to find someone he could not buy." I looked at the folder she had opened on my table. Not enough to read, just enough to see that it was thick and organized and had the look of something prepared by attorneys. "Start from the beginning," I said. Isabelle pulled a stool from the corner without asking and sat down. I decided not to comment on that. "My grandfather," she said, "built the first Voss property on Magazine Street in 1961. He expanded the company slowly, restored buildings that other people were tearing down, turned them into hotels and event spaces before that was fashionable. When he died, he left the company to my father, who left it to me. But my grandfather was a careful man. He did not fully trust comfortable people." She paused. The word careful came out with some weight behind it, like she was being generous with her description. "There is a clause in the original trust," she continued. "It does not transfer full operational authority to any single heir unless that heir is, in the language of the document, settled in partnership. My grandfather believed that unmarried people made reckless decisions. It was 1974 when he wrote it, and he was not a progressive thinker. As long as I remain unpartnered, a secondary trustee can request a temporary management review. Victor filed that request last week. And if he gets his review, he will move to liquidate the Magazine Street property, the St. Charles venue, and the French Quarter inns. He already has buyers. He has been negotiating for 6 months without telling me. I knew those buildings. Anyone who cared about what this city used to look like knew those buildings. The St. Charles Ballroom had Eastlake millwork on every cornice. The French Quarter inns had cast iron galleries that dated to before the Civil War. Victor Voss wanted to sell them to people who would gut them, update them, and call the result boutique. "Why me?" I asked. Isabelle looked at my hands for a moment. "Victor has been trying to acquire this building for 3 years, through shell companies, through intermediaries, through a direct offer made to your landlord, who sold you the building last year before Victor could move. You keep refusing to participate in transactions you find dishonest." "He tried to buy my landlord." "Yes, your landlord sold to you instead because you had been his tenant for 6 years and he did not like Victor's attorney." I thought about Lou Thibodeau, who had sold me this building for 20% under market because, as he put it, he liked watching me work through the window in the mornings. I had not known about any of the rest of it. I did not enjoy knowing now. You researched me. I had to. No, I said. You wanted to know I was the right shape for what you needed. She did not deny it. I needed someone Victor could not flatter, pressure, or acquire. Someone with no outstanding debts to anyone connected to his network. Someone who would not disappear when this got uncomfortable. I looked past her at the long case clock against the wall. 8 feet tall, walnut case, German movement, belonged to a family in Metairie who had brought it in because the chime had been running 7 minutes fast. Somebody had adjusted the pendulum wrong and never corrected it. Everything since then had been off. What do I get? I asked. Compensation, she said. Documented, legal, protected. A written agreement that your business and property are fully insulated from any outcome related to this arrangement. Independent legal review before you sign anything. A dissolution pathway that is clean and mutual. That's not what I asked. She looked at me. The truth, I said. All of it. Why it has to be this week. What happens if Victor finds a way to challenge it anyway? What you left out because you thought I'd walk. Isabelle was quiet for a moment. The mantel clock on the shelf behind her ticked 4 times. My mother helped run these properties for 30 years, she said. She is the reason the St. Charles Ballroom still has its original ceiling. She fought to keep every piece of that millwork when the contractor said replacing it would be cheaper. She died 2 years ago, and the last place she loved was that building. Victor was not at her funeral. He was in Miami closing a deal on a parking structure. I let that sit. She looked at the clock on my work table. Victor will call this a stunt. He will say I panicked and grabbed the nearest available person. He will try to make you look small and make me look desperate. I need you to understand that before you say yes. And if I say yes, I've got one condition. What condition? You come here first, to this shop. You meet the people who will get pulled into your family's mess before I agree to anything. She looked around the room. At the clocks on every surface, the tools arranged on pegboard, the ledger open on the end of the table, the coffee mug with Beckett fine clocks on it that my assistant had given me as a joke and that I had been using for 3 years. All right, she said. Not all right. You sit with this for 10 minutes before we go anywhere. This is what you're asking me to risk. She said. I went back to the clock movement. I was not ignoring her. I was showing her what she was interrupting. After 7 minutes, she said quietly, your shop smells like machine oil and cedar. The cedar is from the cases. The oil is from everything else. My mother's office smelled like both, she said, from the restoration work. I set down my tool. Okay, I said, I'll hear the rest. My assistant, a 26-year-old named June, who had been working for me for 2 years and knew more about French clock movements than most people twice her age, came in from the back room and stopped dead when she saw Isabelle. Are we being audited? June asked. Worse, I said. I'm getting engaged. June looked at Isabelle. To who? I pointed. Isabelle offered her hand. Isabelle Voss. June did not shake it immediately. She looked at me. Is this real, or is this a clock thing where you explain it with an analogy later? It is very much not a clock thing. June shook Isabelle's hand. Does she know about the Garnier job? Because you were not pleasant during the Garnier job. I was pleasant. You made a client cry. He was wrong about the escapement. Isabelle watched this exchange like she was recalibrating something. Then she said to June, what should I know about him that he would not tell me himself? June thought about it. He gives people more time to pay than he should. He stays late when a piece matters to the owner, even when the repair is not profitable. He has not raised his rates in 4 years because he does not want to lose the older clients who have been coming here since his father ran the shop. I looked at June. You can stop, she asked. Isabelle was quiet on the way to the attorney's office. I drove my own truck. She had offered the car service and I had declined. When we stopped at a light on St. Charles, she looked at the Avenue Oaks going by and said, June has worked for you for 2 years and she knows your rate history. She does the books. She's protective of you. She's 26 and thinks I make bad business decisions. Do you? Probably, I said. but not this one yet. The attorney was a woman named Ms. Fontenot, who had an office in a converted Creole cottage on Felicity Street, and who looked at me over her reading glasses like she had seen stranger things, but was reserving judgment. She walked me through the agreement page by page, while Isabelle waited in the hall. My business stayed mine. My building stayed mine. Any press fallout was legally isolated from my client relationships. If the arrangement dissolved, the dissolution was mutual and documented. You understand, this is not a typical legal engagement, Miss Fontenot said. I restore antique clocks for a living, I said. I know what unusual looks like. She looked at my hands. You also know things break down. And sometimes you can fix them, I said. And sometimes you can't. But you still look at the movement honestly before you decide. She handed me a pen. We went to the courthouse on Friday morning. No family, no flowers. I wore the jacket I kept in the back of the shop for client presentations. The navy one that June said made me look like a person who respected other people's time. Isabelle wore a dark green dress and carried the folder of documents like it was a briefcase. Her attorney, a man named Gerald, who spoke in complete paragraphs, stood to her left. Miss Fontenot stood to my right. The clerk read the necessary language. Isabelle answered clearly. I said yes because I had decided to mean it. When it came to rings, Isabelle went still. Gerald whispered something, and she gave him the kind of look that ends conversations. I reached into my jacket pocket. My father's, I said. It was a plain silver band, worn smooth on the inside from years of daily wear. My father had run the same shop for 22 years before his hands gave out. He had taken the ring off the last day he worked and handed it to me without ceremony and said, "Take care of the movements." I had kept it on the shelf beside the regulator clock ever since. That morning, I had picked it up without deciding to. Isabelle looked at it the way people sometimes looked at an old clock when they finally understood what it had survived. "We can use it," I said. "I can take it off later." She picked it up carefully. When she put it on my finger, her hands were steady in a way that looked like a decision she had just made. The clerk said the words that made it legal. Gerald had booked a room at the Voss family's Magazine Street property for the trust review meeting at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The building was 4 stories, brick, dark green shutters, a lobby with a terrazzo floor, and transoms above every door that I had to stop myself from examining too closely. Victor was already at the conference table when we arrived. He was younger than I expected, smooth in the way that some people worked very hard to achieve. He looked at me the way people look at furniture they are thinking of moving. "Isabelle," he said, "this is a bold choice." She set the marriage certificate on the table. "The clause is satisfied, Victor." He leaned back. "You married a clockmaker this morning?" "Clock restorer," I said. Victor looked at me directly for the first time. "Excuse me." "Clock restorer. I don't make clocks. I repair and restore them. If you're going to describe what I do, use the right word." One of the older board members at the far end of the table pressed his lips together like he was suppressing something. Victor smiled easily. "And what did she offer you, Mr. Beckett?" "Nothing that would interest you." "Money interests most people." "Then you must find most people very easy to deal with." Isabelle's heel pressed lightly against my shoe under the table. I read it as stop. I did not entirely stop. Victor spread his hands. "You expect this board to believe a same-day marriage satisfies a clause written to protect the long-term stability of this company?" Gerald stepped forward and laid out the trust language, the certificate, the filings, the timeline, everything clean and documented. The board chair, a woman named Dr. Arcano, who had white hair and the expression of someone who had survived 3 generations of Voss family decisions, read the documents twice without speaking. Victor watched Isabelle the whole time. "You have turned a family matter into theater." "No," Isabelle said, her voice level. "I stopped you from selling my mother's buildings by Friday." Dr. Arcano set the papers down. "The cause condition has been satisfied. Temporary review authority remains suspended. Ms. Voss retains full operational control." Victor stood, adjusted his jacket, and looked at me. "I hope the arrangement suits you, Mr. Beckett." "It does," I said. "I hope losing suits you." Isabelle's hand found my arm under the table before I could say anything further. Victor left without responding. For about 4 minutes I thought we had come through clean. Then Isabelle's phone lit up, then Gerald's. Then Dr. Arshino's assistant came to the door with an expression that had no good news in it. Isabelle turned the screen toward me. A local news site had already published a story. The headline had my name spelled correctly and Voss in large letters. It described the marriage as a possible trust manipulation, citing an anonymous family source. Victor had moved fast. Outside the building's front windows, a camera crew was setting up on the sidewalk. Isabelle's driver called to say someone was already outside her building on Esplanade. She stood very still in the way I was starting to recognize as her version of not panicking. I picked up her folder from the table and handed it to her. "You needed a fiancé by Friday," I said. She looked at me. "It's Friday," I said, "so pack a bag for my place." Isabelle arrived at my house on Terpsichore Street at 8:30 that night with 2 rolling bags, a leather tote, a garment bag, and the expression of someone who had handled 47 phone calls since 2 that afternoon and was not done yet. My house was behind the shop, connected by a covered walkway that leaked in heavy rain and that I kept meaning to fix. It was narrow and old and had a courtyard the size of a parking space and a kitchen table that had belonged to my grandmother and that I had never once considered replacing. She stepped inside and looked around. "This is very small," she said. "Welcome to Magazine Street Residential." She caught herself. "I didn't mean it badly." "You meant it accurately. Guest room is in the back. The window air unit is loud but works. The shower pressure is good. The kitchen is small, but it has everything." She set her bag down and looked at the work table I kept near the back window, where I sometimes brought small movements to work on at night. "Do you work at home too?" "When something interests me." "What interests you right now?" I looked at the movement on the table. A small carriage clock from the 1890s, French, the kind of thing someone's great-grandmother had brought over and that had been sitting in a box for 50 years. "Somebody overwound it," I said. "The mainspring snapped, but the rest of the movement is fine. It just needs the broken part replaced and someone to trust it enough to let it run." She looked at it for a moment and did not say anything. I was not sure she understood I was talking about more than the clock. The first 2 weeks were not romantic. They were logistical and occasionally irritating. Isabelle had calls before 7 every morning. I had deliveries from suppliers that arrived before 8 and that required me to be in the shop before the calls were done. We shared the kitchen the way 2 people share a narrow hallway, which is to say carefully and with occasional collisions. She drank black coffee in the mornings. I made it too strong and she did not complain for the first 4 days. And then on the 5th day, I came downstairs and found her standing at the machine with the manual out. Not because she wanted to change anything, just, she said, because she wanted to understand it. "It doesn't need understanding," I said. "It needs you to push the button and wait." "That's what you said about the trust clause." And I was right about the trust clause. She poured the coffee and handed me a mug. "You make everything sound simple?" "I make things sound like what they are," I said. "There's a difference." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Victor is going to file a formal challenge, Gerald thinks, by the end of the month." "What does Gerald recommend?" "Documentation, evidence of cohabitation, joint activities, things that look like a real marriage to an outside reviewer." "What does a real marriage look like to an outside reviewer?" She set her mug down. "Apparently someone being witnessed at your home, your shop, your regular locations, the 2 of you in the same spaces at the same times. So Tuesday you come to the shop." "That is not what I—" "Tuesday," I said. "You come to the shop, meet the suppliers, talk to June, see what you put my name next to when you walked through that door." She came on Tuesday. June watched her from across the work table for the first 30 seconds and then handed her a cup of coffee from the back room and showed her where to put her bag without being asked. One of my repair suppliers, a man named Theodore who drove in from Baton Rouge twice a month with parts I could not source closer, arrived at 10 and spent 20 minutes talking to Isabelle about the difference between Swiss and German suspension springs while I worked on a Vienna regulator nearby. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers. When Theodore left, June appeared at my elbow. "She knows what she's looking at," she said quietly. "She runs buildings," I said. "She understands old things." "She was looking at you," June said, "not the regulator." I did not answer that. At noon, I took Isabelle through the back of the shop where I stored the pieces waiting for parts. The case is under restoration. the movements soaking in cleaning solution. This is what your name is attached to now, I told her. These clients have been coming here for years. Some of them brought their clocks in when my father ran the shop. They trust me because I've never told them something was wrong when it was fine, and never told them something was fine when it was wrong. Victor comes after me through the press. It makes them nervous. They're nervous means they go somewhere else. I understand, she said. You're starting to, I said. She did not argue. That was the moment I began to trust her. 3 weeks in, Victor filed his challenge. The claim was direct. The marriage was an arrangement. The trust clause required genuine partnership, not a legal transaction. He had 3 witnesses prepared to testify that they had never seen Isabelle in a relationship prior to the filing date. We met with Gerald and Ms. Fontenot together at my kitchen table. The documents spread across the surface my grandmother had used for 30 years of Sunday dinners. Isabelle sat across from me with her reading glasses on, which I had not known she wore, and which made her look less like a CEO and more like a person. The meeting took 2 hours. When it ended and the attorneys had gone, Isabelle stayed at the table and did not move. I washed the coffee cups. The courtyard was visible through the kitchen window. The fig tree I kept meaning to prune dropping light on the bricks. He will make this personal, she said. Let him. He has photographs of me at every public event I attended in the last 4 years. All alone. He will use them to show that this is not consistent with a real relationship. Then we go to the review, I said, and I tell them what's true. What is true? I turn around from the sink. That my kitchen table has a scratch on the left side from where your bag hit it the first night. That you reorganized my spice cabinet on day 3 and then apologized for it, and I told you to stop apologizing because it needed to be done. That you know Theodore prefers to be called Ted once he's visited 3 times, and you remembered that on his 2nd visit. That you fixed the latch on the courtyard door because I had been meaning to do it for a year, and you noticed it was loose and found the screwdriver without asking. Isabelle was very still. Those things are true, I said. They are not what your grandfather's clause imagined, but they are what happened. She took her glasses off and set them on the table. You've been paying attention. I pay attention to everything in my shop, I said. Old habit. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Jack was supposed to be here. Who? Nobody, she said quickly. Sorry, I meant Gerald. Gerald was supposed to lead the secondary filing. I looked at her. She was not talking about Gerald. The review board met at the end of October in a conference room at the Marriott on Canal. Neutral territory, Gerald had said, which meant nobody owned the furniture and everyone was uncomfortable. Victor's attorney had prepared a substantial presentation. Timeline gaps. Absence of public documentation of the relationship prior to September. A property record search showing we had lived in different zip codes for the past 8 years. Dr. Arsenault chaired the session. 3 independent board members sat on either side. Victor's attorney finished and sat down. I leaned forward. Mr. Beckett, the chair said, do you wish to make a statement? I have a question, I said. From Mr. Voss. Victor looked at me. What's the address of the Magazine Street property? The exact address. Victor said it. What year was the lobby terrazzo installed? Victor paused. I don't know the exact. 1938, I said. What wood species are the transoms? I'm not sure what this. Cypress, I said, reclaimed from a mill that closed in 1942. The original contractor documented it. Isabelle can tell you the contractor's name because she read the original building file when she was 11 years old and her mother brought her to the property for the first time. I looked at the board. I know these things because Isabelle told them to me at my kitchen table. In the first week she lived in my house because she did not know how to be in a space and not tell the truth about what she loved. The room was quiet. Victor knows the address because it's in his acquisition file, I said. There is a difference. Dr. Arsenault studied her documents for a moment. Then she looked at Victor's attorney. The board does not find sufficient grounds to overturn the clause satisfaction. She set her pen down. Ms. Voss retains operational authority. Victor's face did not change much. He straightened his jacket and looked at Isabelle. This is not finished. Yes, Isabelle said, it is. Afterward, we ended up in the parking garage while Gerald pulled the car around. Just the 2 of us in the concrete quiet. Isabelle was looking at the elevator doors. You didn't have to do that, she said. I didn't perform it, I said. those things happened. She turned toward me. She had her glasses in her hand, folded, held against her chest like she was thinking about something she had not yet decided. "Miles," she said. "Yeah?" She stepped close and put her free hand flat against my sternum and kissed me, not for the board, not for Victor, not for Gerald or Dr. Arsenault or anyone with a camera. For the first time since she had walked into my shop in that gray blazer, something between us was entirely private. When she pulled back, I said, "We should get out of this garage before Ted finds out and tells everyone in Baton Rouge." She laughed, real, unguarded, the kind of sound I had not heard from her before. In the car, she sat close enough that her shoulder was against mine. Gerald wisely said nothing. When we got back to Terpsichore Street, she stood in the kitchen doorway while I hung my jacket on the chair. I said we should not rush anything just because a courthouse had gotten there first. She said she was glad I said that. I said, "Don't look relieved." She said she was not relieved. She said she was tired of things being decided for her in advance. So we did it slowly. She kept the guest room for another month. I kept making the coffee too strong, and she kept drinking it without complaining until one morning, she put her mug down and said, "Miles, there is a grind setting on that machine," and then she adjusted it and said nothing more about it. I started leaving the work table clear when she wanted to sit there in the evenings with her drawings of the Magazine Street renovation plans. She started leaving one of her pencils on my side of the table without explaining why. Theodore visited in November and called her Isabelle, and she said, "Call me Izzy if you want," and he said he would think about it, and 2 weeks later he called her Izzy on a phone call about suspension springs, and I heard her smile to the wall. Victor filed 2 more motions. Both were denied. The buyers he had been negotiating with moved on. The Magazine Street property went forward with the restoration plan Isabelle had been developing since before her mother died. The St. Charles Ballroom kept its millwork. The French Quarter Inns kept their galleries. In December, I came home from a site visit in Gentilly and found Isabelle at the kitchen table. No phone, no drawings, no legal folders, just one envelope in the center of the table. That told me everything before I sat down. She had changed into jeans and an old pullover that said Tulane across the chest in letters faded from washing. Her hair was down. Her face was composed in the way I had learned meant she had already done the hard part somewhere else and was not going to do it twice. "What's that?" I asked. She pushed the envelope across the table. "Annulment papers. The terms are clean. Your shop, your building, your business, all untouched. Gerald reviewed everything and so did an outside attorney I hired specifically so you would have someone with no connection to my family. You owe nothing. You have no obligations. There is no public statement unless you want one. You practiced that. Several times. How many? More than I'm going to tell you." She folded her hands on the table. "The clause has been satisfied. Victor has no viable path. The board is stable. What I asked of you was not small, and I will not let you stay because you started something and feel responsible for finishing it." She paused. "I don't want a man who stays out of loyalty when he means goodbye." I sat down across from her. "You think that's what this is?" I said. "I think you are someone who finishes what he starts," she said. "And I think that is not the same as choosing something freely." I opened the envelope, pulled out the first page, names, dates, legal structure, a clean exit from something that had stopped being clean about 3 weeks after it started. My father's ring caught the fluorescent light from the fixture above the table. Isabelle saw me look at it. "You can keep wearing it," she said. "Or not. Either way." I put the pages back in the envelope. I pushed it across the table toward her. "No," I said. She looked up. "I don't want the guest room empty," I said. "I don't want my work table back. I don't want to eat takeout alone and call it quiet. I don't want to hear about the Magazine Street renovation from a press release. I don't want to take this ring off and file it back on the shelf and pretend it was just something we used to get through October." Her eyes went bright, but she did not look away. "You gave me a way out," I said. "I know why you did it. But you came into my shop and asked me for the truth before you asked me for anything else. So here's mine. I am not staying because I started something. I am staying because the thing that started is the best part of my current situation, and I would like to see what it becomes." "Miles," she said softly. You reorganized my spice cabinet, I said. Nobody reorganizes a spice cabinet in a place they're planning to leave. She looked down at the envelope. Then she picked it up and set it on the chair behind her, out of reach, like she was putting it somewhere it could not interrupt anymore. I reorganized it because cumin was next to the cinnamon, and that is not a system, she said. It was my system. It was chaos with a drawer. And yet here you are, I said. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. The ring was between her palm and my knuckle, and she held it there for a moment without speaking. I don't want out either, she said. That was when the arrangement ended. Not in front of the board, not in a parking garage or courthouse or a conference room at a neutral hotel. It ended at my grandmother's kitchen table on Terpsichore Street with the fig tree dropping shadows on the courtyard bricks, and Theodore's latest invoice still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pelican. After that, things became ours. Isabelle moved her drafting work to the front room where the light was better. I fixed the courtyard gate properly instead of meaning to. June stopped introducing Isabelle to repair clients as Miles's wife and started introducing her as Isabelle, the way you introduce someone whose position in a room no longer requires explanation. The magazine street renovation broke ground in February. I was there on the first day because Isabelle asked me to come and because I wanted to see what happened when you finally let something that had been waiting become what it was meant to be. 6 months later, we had a real ceremony in the courtyard of the St. Charles Ballroom. Small 20 people, no press, nothing Victor could photograph and use. June stood in the front row and cried in a way that she later attributed to allergies. Theodore drove in from Baton Rouge in a tie. Dr. Termal, our nose sent flowers. Isabelle walked in wearing something simple and dark green that she had found in a shop on Magazine Street 3 blocks from my shop. She had not told me about it in advance. When she came to the courtyard door, I understood that she had made 100 decisions to get to that moment, and every one of them had been hers. When the time came for the ring, she already knew. I reached into my pocket and she smiled before I opened my hand, because she had known I would bring it. This time nobody mentioned taking it off later. Right in the comments, when she pushed those annulment papers across the table, did you think I was going to say yes? Because for about 3 seconds, I thought about it too. And then I looked at the ring and I thought about the spice cabinet. And that was it. Years later, when people asked how we met, she always told them the same way. She said, I walked into his shop and asked him to save my family's buildings, and I would say, she put her bag on my work table without asking. And she would say, your work table needed something on it. And I would say, it has plenty on it now. And that was always where the story ended, because everything after that belonged only to us. I think about the moment Isabelle pushed that envelope across the table a lot, not because I almost said yes, but because of what it took for her to prepare it in the first place. She had won. The board held. Victor was finished, and instead of sitting with that, she spent her evening organizing a clean legal exit for someone she did not want to lose. That is not the move of a calculating person. That is the move of someone who has spent her whole life watching other people take things from her family and decided, quietly and without announcing it, that she was not going to do it to someone else. I have been thinking about what actually caused everything that happened between us, and I don't think it was luck or timing or the particular clause in an old man's trust document. I think it was a sequence of choices that each one of us made. Small ones, that stacked up into something neither of us planned. She chose to research someone who could not be purchased before she ever walked through my door. That was a decision rooted in honesty. She wanted a person, not a transaction. Even when a transaction was technically all she needed. I chose to say, I will hear the rest, before I said yes, because I needed to know the whole truth before I put my name to anything. June chose to hand Isabelle a coffee on Tuesday like she belonged there, because June has good judgment about people, and she trusted it. Theodore chose to call her Izzy 2 weeks after she said he could, because he had decided by then that she had earned it. None of those choices were dramatic. None of them showed up in a courtroom filing. But every single one of them was real, and the real ones are the ones that hold. What I keep coming back to is this. Victor had access to the same buildings, the same history, the same family name. What he did not have was any interest in understanding what those things were actually worth. He saw numbers. He moved fast. He was smart in the way that a certain kind of person is smart, efficient, strategic, always looking for leverage. But he did not have the patience to sit with something long enough to know it, and that, in the end, is what cost him everything. Isabelle had patience. She learned the contractor's name from a building file when she was 11 years old because her mother brought her there, and she paid attention. She sat in my shop for 7 minutes without talking because I asked her to, and she understood why. She fixed the courtyard gate latch because it was loose and it bothered her, and she did not wait to be asked. That is not a soft quality. That is an exceptionally hard one. Most people do not know how to stay present with something long enough to actually see it. I fixed clocks for a long time before Isabelle walked in, and the thing about clocks is that they do not lie to you. A movement that has been mistreated will tell you. A movement that was overwound will snap eventually, no matter how well you clean the rest of it. You cannot charm a clock into working. You cannot pressure it or outmaneuver it. You have to understand it honestly, work carefully, and then trust it enough to let it run. I think people are like that too. I think Isabelle knew that before I did. And I think the spice cabinet is still organized correctly.